Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Hendrix made his way to Rosemary's apartment. His heart raced with anticipation, a mix of excitement and nervousness coursing through his veins. He'd known Rosemary for years through his wife Sue, but this was different. Today, he was stepping into a world he'd only dreamed about. Hendrix paused at the door, taking a deep breath before knocking. The sound echoed in the hallway, and for a moment he considered turning back. But then the door swung open, revealing Rosemary's warm smile. "There you are. Come on in. I've got everything set up," she said, ushering him inside. The apartment was a riot of color and fabric. Dresses hung from every available surface, shoes were scattered across the floor, and an intimidating array of makeup covered the coffee table. "I hope you're ready for a transformation," Rosemary grinned, clapping her hands together. Hendrix nodded, unable to find his voice. He'd confided in Rosemary about his desire to cross-dress, never expecting her to take such an interest. But here she was, offering to help him explore this side of himself. "Let's start with the basics," Rosemary said, guiding him to a chair. "First, we need to give you a smooth canvas." She produced an electric razor and began working on his face, carefully removing every trace of stubble. The gentle buzz filled the room as Hendrix closed his eyes, letting himself relax into the experience. "There we go," Rosemary murmured, running her hand over his cheek, smooth as silk. "Now for the fun part." She dove into her makeup collection, explaining each step as she worked. Foundation to even out his skin tone, concealer to hide any blemishes, powder to set it all in place. Hendrix watched in fascination as his features began to soften and change. "Eyes are the windows to the soul," Rosemary declared, brandishing an eyeshadow palette. "We're going for a smoky look. It'll make your eyes pop." Hendrix held still as she applied layer after layer of color, blending and smudging until she was satisfied. False lashes came next, delicately glued into place. "Bat those beautiful eyes for me," Rosemary instructed, and Hendrix complied, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the lashes. A swipe of blush across his cheekbones, a dash of highlighter to catch the light, and finally, lipstick. Rosemary chose a deep red, carefully outlining his lips before filling them in. "Take a look," she said, handing him a mirror. Hendrix gasped. The face staring back at him was both familiar and utterly foreign. His features were softer, more delicate. His eyes seemed larger, framed by long lashes and smoky shadow, and his lips, full and red. They looked like they belonged to someone else entirely. "What do you think?" Rosemary asked, watching his reaction closely. I don't know what to say," Hendrix whispered, touching his face in wonder. "It's incredible." Rosemary beamed. "We're just getting started. Now for the clothes?" She led him to the closet, pulling out outfit after outfit. Hendrix tried on dresses, skirts, blouses, each one making him feel more feminine than the last. Rosemary showed him how to walk in heels, laughing as he tottered around the room. "You're a natural," she encouraged, steadying him as he wobbled. "Just remember, hips lead the way." As the day wore on, Hendrix grew more comfortable in his new skin. He found himself laughing and joking with Rosemary, striking poses as she snapped pictures. "Oh, I almost forgot," Rosemary exclaimed suddenly. "I have something special for you." She disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a garment bag. "Close your eyes," she instructed. Hendrix obeyed, hearing the rustle of fabric. Something soft and heavy settled over his shoulders. "Okay, open them." He blinked, finding himself face to face with his reflection in Rosemary's full-length mirror. A wedding dress hugged his figure, layers of tulle and lace cascading to the floor. A veil perched atop his styled hair, completing the bridal look. "Oh my God," Hendrix breathed, turning to see himself from all angles. "It's beautiful." Rosemary grinned, adjusting the veil. "Every girl dreams of her wedding day, right? I thought you might want to experience it." Tears pricked at Hendrix's eyes, threatening to ruin his carefully applied makeup. "Thank you," he whispered, "for all of this." Rosemary squeezed his hand. "That's what friends are for. Now, let's get some pictures before we head out." They spent the next hour posing, Rosemary directing Hendrix through a series of bridal shots. By the end, they were both laughing, giddy with the excitement of it all. "All right, time for the grand finale," Rosemary declared. "Let's show you off to the world." Hendrix hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Rosemary patted his arm. "Trust me, you look amazing. No one will recognize you. Besides, I'm starving, and I know this great little restaurant nearby." After some gentle persuasion, Hendrix agreed. They chose a final outfit, a sleek black dress that hugged his curves, paired with strappy heels and a clutch purse. Rosemary touched up his makeup and gave his hair one last fluff. "Perfect," she declared. "Shall we, madam?" Hendrix took a deep breath and nodded. They left the apartment, Rosemary's arm linked through his for support. The walk to the restaurant was nerve-wracking, every passing glance making Hendrix's heart race. But no one seemed to give him a second look, and gradually he began to relax. The restaurant was cozy and dimly lit, perfect for their outing. They were shown to a table near the back, and Hendrix sank gratefully into his chair. "See, nothing to worry about," Rosemary said, grinning over her menu. They ordered drinks and appetizers, falling into easy conversation. Hendrix found himself laughing more freely than he had in years, reveling in this new persona. As their entrees arrived, Hendrix glanced towards the door and froze. A group of familiar faces had just walked in. His friends, including his wife Sue. "Oh no," he whispered, ducking his head. Rosemary followed his gaze. "Friends of yours?" Hendrix nodded, panic rising in his chest. "What do we do?" Rosemary considered for a moment, then smiled mischievously. "We play it cool. I'll pretend I don't know them, just to act natural." Before Hendrix could protest, the group was being led to a nearby table. He kept his eyes fixed on his plate, heart pounding. "Evening, ladies," came a familiar voice. It was Tom, always the charmer of the group. Rosemary looked up, smiling politely. "Good evening. Hope we're not interrupting your dinner," Sue added, her eyes flickering between Rosemary and Hendrix. "Not at all," Rosemary replied smoothly. "Please enjoy your meal." The group settled at their table, and Hendrix could feel their curious glances. He took a sip of water, willing his hand not to shake. "You're doing great," Rosemary murmured. "They don't suspect a thing." As the evening wore on, Hendrix gradually relaxed. He could hear snippets of conversation from the other table, his friends speculating about the mysterious women dining nearby. It was surreal, listening to them talk about him without realizing who he was. "I wonder where Hendrix is," he heard Sue say at one point. "He said he had plans tonight, but he was pretty vague about it." Hendrix suppressed a smile, catching Rosemary's eye. She winked at him, raising her glass in a silent toast. As they finished their meal, Hendrix felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Part of him wanted to reveal himself, to see the shock on his friends' faces. But a larger part treasured this secret, this glimpse into another life. They paid their bill and stood to leave. As they passed the other table, Hendrix couldn't resist giving a small wave. His friends smiled and nodded in return, completely unaware of who they were really seeing. Outside the restaurant, Hendrix let out a long breath. "I can't believe we pulled that off," Rosemary laughed, linking her arm through his once more. "You were amazing. How did it feel?" Hendrix thought for a moment. "Terrifying. Exhilarating. I've never felt so seen and unseen at the same time." They walked back to Rosemary's apartment in comfortable silence, the night air cool against Hendrix's skin. As they climbed the stairs, a wave of emotion washed over him. "Thank you," he said softly as Rosemary unlocked the door. "For today. For everything." Rosemary turned, her eyes soft in the dim hallway light. "You don't have to thank me. This is who you are, Hendrix. I'm just glad I could help you explore it." Inside the apartment, Hendricks stood before the mirror one last time. He took in the sight of himself, the carefully applied makeup, the elegant dress, the confident posture he'd somehow acquired over the course of the day. "So?" Rosemary said, coming to stand beside him. "What happens now?" Hendricks met her eyes in the reflection. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I can't go back to pretending this part of me doesn't exist." Rosemary squeezed his shoulder. "Then don't. Take it one step at a time. Maybe start by telling Sue." The thought sent a flutter of anxiety through Hendricks's stomach, but he nodded. "You're right. She deserves to know." As he began the process of removing his makeup and changing back into his own clothes, Hendricks felt a sense of loss. But underneath it was a newfound confidence, a certainty about who he was and who he wanted to be. "Same time next week?" Rosemary asked as she walked him to the door. Hendricks grinned. Wouldn't miss it for the world. As he stepped out into the night, Hendricks felt like a new person. The world looked different somehow, full of possibilities he'd never considered before. He walked home with a spring in his step, already planning his next adventure in this newly discovered part of himself. The streets were quiet as Hendricks made his way home, his mind racing with the events of the day. He felt lighter somehow, as if a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. The cool night air kissed his freshly shaved cheeks, a reminder of the transformation he'd undergone. As he approached his house, Hendricks slowed his pace. The living room light was on, which meant Sue was still awake. His heart began to race again, but this time with a different kind of nervousness. He knew he needed to tell her about his experience, about this part of himself he'd kept hidden for so long. But how would she react? Taking a deep breath, Hendricks unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of home enveloped him, grounding him in reality after the surreal day he'd had. "Hendricks, is that you?" Sue's voice called from the living room. "Yeah, it's me," he replied, hanging up his coat. He paused for a moment, gathering his courage, then walked into the living room. Sue was curled up on the couch, a book in her lap. She looked up as he entered, a smile spreading across her face. "There you are. I was starting to worry. How was your day?" Hendricks sat down beside her, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "It was interesting. Actually, there's something I need to talk to you about." Sue's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of concern. "Is everything okay?" "Yes. No, I mean..." Hendricks took a deep breath. "I've been keeping something from you, Sue. Something about myself that I've only recently started to understand and accept." Sue reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Whatever it is, you can tell me. We're in this together, remember?" Hendricks nodded, drawing strength from her touch. "Today, I spent the day with Rosemary. But not just hanging out. She helped me explore a side of myself I've always been curious about, but too afraid to pursue." Sue's brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I've always been fascinated by women's clothing," Hendricks said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Not just looking at it, but wearing it, feeling it, becoming someone else for a little while. Today, Rosemary helped me do that. She dressed me up, did my makeup. We even went out to dinner." He paused, watching Sue's face carefully for her reaction. To his surprise, she didn't look shocked or disgusted. Instead, there was a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. "Is that where you were when we saw Rosemary at the restaurant?" Sue asked softly. Hendricks nodded, relief washing over him. "You knew?" Sue smiled, squeezing his hand. "I had a feeling. There was something familiar about the woman with Rosemary, but I couldn't quite place it. Now it makes sense." "You're not upset?" Hendricks asked hesitantly. Sue shook her head. "Surprised, yes, but upset? No, Hendricks, I love you, all of you. If this is part of who you are, then I want to understand it. To support you." Tears welled up in Hendricks's eyes, and he pulled Sue into a tight embrace. "I was so afraid of how you'd react," he whispered into her hair. Sue pulled back, cupping his face in her hands. Never be afraid to be yourself with me. That's what marriage is about, isn't it? Accepting each other, flaws and all. Though I wouldn't call this a flaw. It's just another beautiful facet of who you are. They spent the next few hours talking, Hendrix sharing every detail of his day with Rosemary. Sue listened attentively, asking questions and offering support. As the night wore on, Hendrix felt a sense of peace settle over him. He'd taken a huge step today, not just in exploring his identity, but in sharing it with the person who mattered most. So, Sue said as they were getting ready for bed, does this mean I'll be sharing my closet from now on? Hendrix laughed, pulling her close. Maybe, though I think I might need to build up my own wardrobe. Care to go shopping with me sometime? Sue grinned. I thought you'd never ask. As they settled into bed, Hendrix felt a renewed sense of love and appreciation for his wife. He'd been so afraid of rejection, but instead he'd found acceptance and understanding. It was a powerful reminder of why he'd fallen in love with Sue in the first place. Thank you, he murmured as they drifted off to sleep. For everything. Sue snuggled closer, her voice thick with sleep. Always. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of discovery for Hendrix. With Sue's support and Rosemary's guidance, he began to explore his newfound identity more openly. They went shopping together, Sue and Rosemary helping him choose outfits that flattered his figure and matched his personal style. Hendrix started small, wearing women's underwear beneath his regular clothes. The secret thrill of it gave him a confidence boost throughout the day. Gradually, he began incorporating more feminine elements into his wardrobe, a flowy blouse here, a pair of women's jeans there. One evening, as they were getting ready for a dinner party with friends, Sue paused in the middle of doing her makeup. Why don't you join me? She asked, gesturing to her collection of cosmetics. Hendrix hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Together, they stood at the bathroom mirror, Sue guiding him through the process of applying foundation, blush, and a subtle eyeshadow. When they were done, Hendrix barely recognized himself. The changes were subtle, but they softened his features in a way that made him feel more like his true self. At the dinner party, their friends noticed the change, but couldn't quite put their finger on what was different. Hendrix reveled in the secret, exchanging knowing glances with Sue throughout the evening. As the weeks turned into months, Hendrix's confidence grew. He began to experiment with different styles and personas, each one revealing a new facet of his personality. There was Evelyn, the sophisticated businesswoman who commanded respect in sleek pantsuits and killer heels. Then there was Daisy, the free-spirited bohemian who loved flowing dresses and flower crowns. Sue was there every step of the way, offering support and encouragement. She even surprised Hendrix on their anniversary with a professional photo shoot, allowing him to capture his various personas on film. I want you to be able to look back on these moments, she said as they flipped through the resulting album, to see how far you've come and how beautiful you are in every form. Hendrix's relationship with Rosemary deepened as well. She became not just a friend, but a mentor and confidant. They would spend hours discussing gender identity and the complexities of self-expression. Rosemary introduced Hendrix to other members of the trans community, helping him find a sense of belonging he'd never experienced before. Of course, the journey wasn't always smooth. There were moments of doubt and fear, times when Hendrix wondered if he was making a mistake. But in those moments, he would look at the photos from that first day with Rosemary, or the album Sue had given him, and remember the joy and freedom he'd felt. One of the biggest challenges came when Hendrix decided to tell his friends. He and Sue invited their core group over for dinner, including Tom and his wife, and their other close friends, Mark and Jessica. As they sat around the dining table, enjoying dessert and wine, Hendrix cleared his throat. "There's something I want to share with all of you," he began, his voice shaky but determined. He explained his journey over the past few months, showing them photos and describing how this exploration had changed his life. There was a moment of stunned silence when he finished speaking, and Hendrix felt his heart pounding in his chest. Then Tom, always the jokester of the group, grinned and said, "Well, I'll be damned. No wonder that woman at the restaurant looked so familiar." The tension broke, and soon everyone was laughing and asking questions. Jessica wanted to know where Hendrix bought his shoes, while Mark jokingly complained that Hendrix made a prettier woman than his wife, earning him a playful smack from Jessica. As the night wore on, Hendrix felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude. His friends had accepted him without hesitation, embracing this new aspect of his identity with open arms. In the months that followed, Hendrix continued to explore and grow. He joined a support group for crossdressers and transgender individuals, finding strength in shared experiences. He even started a blog documenting his journey and offering advice to others who might be struggling with their own identities. Sue remained his rock throughout it all. She celebrated his victories, comforted him during his low moments, and loved him unconditionally. Their relationship deepened in ways Hendrix had never imagined possible, built on a foundation of trust, honesty, and mutual respect. 1 year to the day after that first transformative experience with Rosemary, Hendrix found himself standing in front of the mirror once again. This time, Sue stood beside him, both of them dressed to the nines for a charity gala. Hendrix wore a stunning evening gown, its deep blue fabric shimmering in the light. His makeup was flawless, his hair styled in elegant waves. Beside him, Sue looked equally beautiful in a sleek black dress. "Ready to face the world?" Sue asked, squeezing his hand. Hendrix took a deep breath, meeting his own gaze in the mirror. He saw confidence there, and joy, and a sense of wholeness he'd never known before. "Ready," he replied, his voice strong and sure. As they left the house arm in arm, Hendrix felt a surge of pride. He was stepping out into the world as his true self, supported by the love of his wife and friends. It wasn't always easy, and he knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in his life, Hendrix felt truly, completely free. The gala was a whirlwind of music, laughter, and conversation. Hendrix moved through the crowd with grace, his confidence growing with each compliment and admiring glance. He danced with Sue, twirling her across the dance floor as their dresses swirled around them. As the night wore on, Hendrix found himself at the bar, waiting for drinks. A woman he didn't recognize sidled up next to him, her eyes appraising him appreciatively. "That dress is absolutely stunning," she said. "Where did you get it?" Hendrix smiled, pleased by the compliment. "A little boutique downtown," he replied, his voice soft and feminine. "It was quite the find." The woman nodded. "Well, it suits you perfectly. I'm Margaret, by the way." "Evelyn," Hendrix replied, using one of his favorite personas. "It's lovely to meet you, Margaret." They fell into easy conversation, discussing fashion and the gala. Hendrix felt a thrill of excitement, realizing that Margaret had no idea about his true identity. It was a testament to how far he'd come, how comfortable he now was in this skin. As they chatted, Hendrix caught sight of Sue across the room. She was watching him with a soft smile, love and pride shining in her eyes. He excused himself from Margaret and made his way back to his wife, drinks in hand. "Having fun?" Sue asked, accepting her glass. Hendrix nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "More than I ever thought possible. Thank you for encouraging me to come tonight." Sue leaned in, kissing him softly on the cheek. "I'm so proud of you, Hendrix. You're glowing." As the gala wound down, Hendrix and Sue said their goodbyes and headed home. In the car, Hendrix kicked off his heels with a sigh of relief. "I don't think I'll ever get used to those," he chuckled. Sue laughed, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "The price we pay for beauty. But seriously, you were amazing tonight. How do you feel?" Hendrix was quiet for a moment, reflecting on the evening. "I feel whole," he said finally. "Like all the pieces of myself have finally come together. Does that make sense?" Sue nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It makes perfect sense. I'm so happy for you, love." When they arrived home, Hendrix stood in front of the mirror once more, slowly removing his makeup and jewelry. As his face returned to its more familiar state, he realized that he no longer saw two separate identities. Whether he was dressed as Hendrix or Evelyn or any of his other personas, it was all him, all parts of a complex, beautiful whole. Sue came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "What are you thinking?" she asked, resting her chin on his shoulder. Hendrix met her eyes in the mirror, a soft smile playing on his lips. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am. To have you, to have discovered this part of myself, to have friends who accept me. A year ago, I never could have imagined standing here like this." Sue hugged him tighter. "You've always been this person, Hendrix. Strong, beautiful, complex. You just needed the courage to let the world see it." As they got ready for bed, Hendrix felt a sense of peace settle over him. He knew that his journey was far from over. There would be more challenges to face, more aspects of himself to explore. But he was no longer afraid. He had the love and support of his wife, the understanding of his friends, and most importantly, he had finally learned to love and accept himself. Lying in bed, Sue's warmth beside him, Hendrix closed his eyes and smiled. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities. And for the first time in his life, he was ready to face it as his true, complete self. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.